They said a slave could never fight back. They said he could never win. But in 1859, one man proved them all wrong. Because by the time they caught him, 19 white overseers could no longer see. Georgia, 1859. Heat thick as boiling tar. Cotton fields stretching like a white ocean. And in the middle of it, a man named Elias. Tall, silent, built like a wall of carved stone. A man who never raised his voice, never complained, never begged. And that scared the overseers more than any knife ever could. Because Elias had eyes that didn't break, eyes that watched everything, eyes that remembered everything. No one knew where he'd come from. Some said he'd been traded down from Virginia. Others claimed he'd escaped the swamps of Carolina. A few whispered he'd once killed a man with just his hands. The truth was simpler. Elias had survived things no human should survive, and he had learned something powerful along the way. Silence is the most dangerous weapon of all. Every overseer on the plantation feared him, but they couldn't show it. They couldn't admit it, not in front of the other slaves, not in front of Master Caldwell. So they beat harder, yelled louder, punished him more than anyone else. But Elias didn't break, not once, not ever. And that was the beginning of their downfall. Because on a night when the cicadas screamed louder than the whips, when the moon hung low like a dying lantern, when the overseers thought Elias finally slept, he was awake, listening, breathing slow, waiting. For he had discovered something the overseers didn't know they were giving him, a weakness, a flaw, a tiny crack in their power. A trick no one could have imagined, a trick so impossible, so precise, so deadly, it would leave 19 overseers blind. But that night, the first step hadn't come yet. Not the strike, not the scream, not the darkness that would swallow them. First came the spark. And Elias felt it burning in his chest now, a fire he had spent years holding back, a fire he would finally release. Because after tonight, nothing on that plantation would ever look the same. They thought Elias was just another slave, but that night they learned he had been studying them, and what he learned could destroy them. Morning came heavy and slow, fog hugging the fields, dew shining like tiny knives on cotton stems. But Elias felt no cold, no fear, only purpose. He moved through the rows quietly, silent as a ghost. Eyes sharp, mind sharper. Because Elias wasn't planning escape. He wasn't planning revenge. He was planning something far more dangerous, precision. He watched the overseers, their steps, their angles, how close they walked, how they carried their rifles, how they wiped sweat from their foreheads. Every habit, every motion, every mistake. And one mistake stood above all others. A mistake they didn't realize was fatal. The overseers had a habit of spitting tobacco juice. Dark, sticky, always hitting the same patches of dirt, always from the same direction. Elias noticed something. The spit soaked into the soil, but the juice burned ants instantly, killed grass, left little black circles where nothing grew. That juice held poison, not the kind that killed, the kind that burned, the kind that blinded. And the overseers carried it everywhere, in pouches, in their pockets, in their mouths. All Elias needed was one moment, one chance, one distraction. He had no weapons, no knives, no fire, just knowledge. And knowledge was sharper than steel. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the overseers gathered near the shed, laughing, drinking, spitting more tobacco juice into the dirt. Their pouches sat open, unwatched, forgotten. That was the weakness. That was the opportunity. Elias pretended to stumble, pretended to cough, pretended to drop his cotton sack at the exact moment their backs turned. While their boots scraped dirt, while their laughter echoed, while their guard fell, Elias's hand moved, quick, precise, invisible. He took something from their pouches, not everything, just enough. And when he stepped back into the shadows, he held the beginning of the impossible trick, the trick that would take their sight, one by one, until the whole plantation trembled. Because Elias now had the weapon, and none of them even noticed. If you're ready for next, hit like, share, comment, and subscribe to keep this story alive. The overseers thought Elias was harmless, but by sunrise, they would realize he had touched something he was never meant to touch. Night swallowed the plantation whole, stars smothered by thick Georgia clouds. Only the barn lanterns flickered, weak, tired, ready to die. Elias stood alone behind the smokehouse, hand steady, breath slow, eyes burning with a calm that felt unnatural. In his closed fist, the thing he had taken, a thing small enough to hide, dangerous enough to change everything. The overseer's tobacco concentrate, thick, black, a liquid that scorched skin, a liquid that made ants curl into ash. Elias twisted the pouch open. A breath of bitter fumes slapped his face, sharp as knives. He didn't flinch. He dipped a thin twig inside, just a touch, barely a drop. Then he whispered to himself, "This is enough." He wasn't planning to poison them, not planning to kill them. Death was too easy, too quick. Elias wanted something else, something deeper, something that would shake the entire plantation to its bones. He wanted to blind them. Not forever, just long enough to make them listen, long enough to make the master fear him, long enough to make everyone understand he was done suffering. Before the sun rose, the overseers would feel it, the burn, the sting, the darkness creeping across their vision like spilled ink. But first, Elias had to test it. He crouched beside the trough, stirred the water, let the tobacco juice blend, thin, silent, invisible. He dipped a finger in, tapped it to a leaf. The leaf shriveled instantly, curling like it was terrified. Elias nodded once. The test worked. Footsteps sounded behind him, fast, angry, drunk. An overseer stumbling from the barn, sweat shining on his forehead, tobacco dripping from his lip. Elias stepped deeper into the darkness, silent, hidden. The man passed him without seeing a thing, boots inches away, eyes half shut, completely unaware he had walked past the man who would break his world. Elias watched him go, watched him spit into the dirt, watched him wipe his eyes. The overseer blinked, winced, rubbed harder. A faint irritation, barely noticeable. But to Elias, it was the beginning. Proof that the trick worked. Proof that the night of darkness was coming. 19 overseers, 19 pairs of eyes, 19 lives about to change forever. And Elias whispered one final time, "Tomorrow." If you want next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so the story continues. By the fourth sunrise, the overseers felt something strange. A burn, a sting, a darkness creeping in, and none of them knew Elias had already chosen his first target. Dawn cracked open like a wounded sky. Gray light, cold wind, every sound sharper than usual. Elias walked out to the fields early, too early, before the overseers finished their breakfast, before the others dared to move. He wasn't eager, he wasn't nervous, he was calculating. Today was not the day he struck all 19. That would come later. Today was the day he took one overseer, one set of eyes, one lesson. The others would follow like falling dominoes. The first overseer to appear was Reddick. Tall, red beard, mean in a way that made even other white men uncomfortable. Reddick had whipped Elias more times than anyone else. Whipped him until the leather cracked. Whipped him until blood soaked the dust. And every lash had carved something into Elias. Patience, precision, purpose. Reddick spat a thick line of tobacco juice into the dirt, wiped his eyes, rubbed them again. Elias watched closely. The irritation was growing, the burn beginning, the juice doing its work. Reddick cursed under his breath, blinking hard, eyes watering. Perfect. Elias stepped forward with his cotton sack, slow, humble, careful, pretending to be the obedient slave Reddick expected. But his other hand, the hidden hand, brushed the sackcloth, soaked lightly in the poisoned water. Just a touch, just a smear, just enough. When Reddick grabbed Elias by the shoulder, his bare fingers pressed against the damp cloth. It happened instantly. Reddick jerked back, hand twitching, eyes burning like fire had been poured into them. "What the—" He staggered, blinking fast, then faster, then wildly. His vision blurred, shapes melting, light breaking apart. Reddick screamed, not from pain, from confusion, from fear, from the realization that he could barely see Elias standing inches away. Slaves in the field froze. Overseers looked up. Silence swelled like a storm building in the lungs of the earth. Elias stood still, watching, expression calm, eyes unbroken. He didn't run, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply let Reddick fall to his knees, clawing at his eyes. The first overseer was blind, and Elias knew this was only the beginning. For next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, so this story doesn't stop here. One overseer down, 18 left. And suddenly, the plantation realized something terrifying. Elias wasn't afraid of any of them. Reddick's screams echoed across the cotton rows, sharp, broken, unmistakably real. Every slave froze. Every overseer paused mid-step. Even the animals seemed to stop breathing. Blindness didn't happen out here. Pain did. Whips did. Death did. But a man losing his sight? That was new. That was impossible. The overseers rushed toward him, yelling his name, grabbing his shoulders, shaking him like he had answers. Reddick only clawed at his eyes, tears pouring, lids swollen, vision gone. "Something's in my eyes! It's burning! It's burning!" They dragged him inside, confusion rising like smoke, fear chasing behind it. Elias watched them pull Reddick away. Calm, still, silent. Inside him, something shifted. Not pride, not joy, not victory. Just momentum. The wheel had started turning, and he couldn't stop it now. By noon, the plantation was shaking with rumors. Some slaves whispered that God had blinded Reddick. Others said it was sickness. Others thought it was punishment for cruelty. But one thought, one dangerous thought, spread faster than any of the others. Elias did something. And for the first time, the slaves didn't say it with fear. They said it with hope. The overseers, however, said it with hate. 3 of them approached Elias by the stables, sweat dripping, tempers boiling, tension thick enough to suffocate. "You were the last one with Reddick. You touched him. What did you do?" Elias didn't blink, didn't breathe too fast, didn't show a crack in his armor. "I picked cotton. That's all." The overseers stepped closer, too close, close enough for the smell of tobacco seeped from their breath, close enough for Elias to see the faint irritation already forming in their eyelids. The poison was spreading, silently, predictably, beautifully. One overseer jabbed a finger into Elias's chest. "Watch yourself, boy." Elias didn't move, didn't lower his gaze, didn't let fear return, because he knew something they didn't. The moment they touched him, their fate was sealed. That evening, as the sun dropped and the sky bled red, the second overseer felt it. A sting, a blur, a shadow crossing his sight. Elias stood in the doorway of the slave quarters, watching him rub his eyes violently. 18 left, 17 soon, and the night was just beginning. If you want next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so the story keeps unfolding. By nightfall, 2 overseers were half blind, but the third one, he would become the warning shot the whole plantation feared. Darkness crawled over Georgia like a slow-moving beast, thick, heavy, hungry. Inside the slave quarters, whispers buzzed like angry flies. "Reddick can't see. Dawson, too. It's Elias. It has to be." But Elias said nothing. He sat alone, back against the wooden wall, eyes steady, breath calm, mind sharp as a blade, because tonight he would move again. The overseers were restless, paranoid, jumping at shadows, snapping at slaves for breathing too loud, especially Harlan, the third overseer, a man with a jaw like stone and a temper that turned men into scars. Harlan spent the night pacing the yard, rifle over his shoulder, cursing under his breath, spitting tobacco every few steps. Every spit hit the dirt like a drop of poison, and Elias watched from the shadows, counting every move, every angle, every weakness. Because Harlan had something the others didn't: arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, untamable, invincible. And men like that fall the hardest. Near midnight, Harlan stormed into the shed to grab a lantern. He pushed the door open hard. The flame inside flickered. And behind the stacked barrels, Elias waited, silent, still, cold as a whisper on a corpse. Harlan didn't notice him, didn't sense him, too blinded by his own anger. He grabbed the lantern, turned, walked straight past Elias, close enough to touch. Elias moved, a soft brush of cloth, a gentle tap of fingers, a smear of tobacco concentrate across Harlan's sleeve. Invisible, instant, inevitable. Harlan left the shed, cussing at the wind. Didn't see Elias slip into the darkness behind him. Didn't notice the way his eyes already twitched. Didn't feel the fire beginning to build behind his eyelids. But Elias saw it. The blink, the rub, the sudden tightness in the overseer's face. It was beginning. Harlan staggered near the fence, dropped the lantern, grabbed his eyes with both hands. "Damn it! What's happening? What's—" His scream tore through the night, raw, terrified, unmistakable. 3 down, 16 to go. Elias stood in the shadows, unmoving, unshaken, unstoppable. Because the overseers still didn't understand the truth. They weren't hunting Elias. Elias was hunting them. If you want next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so the story keeps rising. 3 overseers blind. 16 left. And now, the plantation wanted blood. Elias's blood. The night didn't sleep. Not after Harlan's scream. Not after the lantern shattered on the dirt. Not after the overseer saw him clawing at his face like a dying animal. Chaos exploded. Shouts, boots, rifles loading, dogs barking so loud the trees shook. The slaves were locked inside their quarters. Doors slammed, chains thrown, guards posted. Someone yelled, "He's poisoning us!" Another shouted, "No man can do that!" Then a third voice whispered what everyone feared. Elias did something. Find him. Inside the cramped slave quarters, bodies pressed close, breathing fast, eyes wide, hearts hammering like fists on wood. But Elias sat in the corner, alone, calm, a shadow inside a shadow. His hands rested on his knees. His gaze never moved. He listened carefully to every voice outside, because now they were coming for him. Master Caldwell's voice cut through the night like a blade, deep, cold, full of something Elias had never heard in him before. Fear. "Bring Elias out here! Search every quarter! Find him!" Torches lit up the yard, their flames shaking with panic. 16 overseers circled like wolves, but wolves who already felt death brushing their necks. Inside, the slaves looked at Elias, not with terror, not with pity, with something sharper, stronger, hope. One woman whispered, "They gon' kill you." Another added, "They think you cursed." A young boy asked, "What you gon' do, Elias?" Elias slowly stood. His shadow stretched across the dirt floor like a growing storm. He said, "I ain't cursed. They are." Before anyone could question him, the door burst open, torches blazing, rifles aimed. An overseer pointed straight at Elias. "That's him! Bring him out!" Elias stepped forward, not in fear, not in surrender. He stepped forward like a man walking into destiny. As they dragged him outside, the slaves pressed against the doorway, watching breathlessly. The overseers circled him, eyes red, hands shaking, some blinking harder than usual, some rubbing their lids without knowing why. The poison was already inside them. Every touch, every breath, every careless wipe of sweat. They didn't know it, but Elias had already won. Because tonight was the night the Master would learn why 19 men would lose their sight, and Elias wasn't done. Not even close. They dragged Elias into the yard. 16 overseers. 16 pairs of eyes, and every single one was already burning. The yard glowed with torchlight, shadows jumping across the dirt like frightened ghosts. Master Caldwell stood in the center, face hard, jaw tight, hands shaking just enough for Elias to notice. Caldwell wasn't angry, he was scared. Men like him hated fear, because fear meant losing control. Reddick was inside the house screaming. Dawson was pacing blind against a wall. Harlan was unconscious on the ground, eyes swollen shut like bees had stung his face. And now 16 overseers surrounded Elias, forming a circle that felt more like a trap than justice. Caldwell pointed at him, voice sharp as a cracked whip. "What did you do to my men?" Elias didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't even breathe too fast, because the overseers were already rubbing their eyes, already blinking, already feeling the sting creeping in like poison smoke. They just didn't know why yet. Caldwell walked closer, too close, close enough for Elias to smell the fear on his breath. "You blind one more of my men," he growled, "and I'll have you hanging by sunrise." Elias finally looked up, slow, steady, cold. "You already too late." A whisper, barely sound, but it sliced through the yard like lightning. The overseers froze. Some blinked harder, some stepped back. Some wiped their eyes and flinched at the sudden burn. Caldwell snapped, "Don't listen to him, he's lying." But he wasn't. Elias lifted his hands slightly, showing they were empty, showing he needed no weapon, no blade, no fire. "You touched me," he said. "Every one of you." The overseers exchanged looks, confused, unsteady, hearts pounding too loud. Elias continued, "When you grabbed me, when you shoved me, when you dragged me out here, it's already on your skin." A murmur rippled through them. Fear, panic, realization. Caldwell barked, "Stand still! He's trying to scare you!" But then it happened. One overseer, Jenkins, suddenly dropped his rifle, grabbed his face with both hands, screamed. His vision collapsed instantly, darkness flooding in like ink spilled in water. Another man blinked wildly, then another, and another, and another. Elias watched the chain reaction spread exactly the way he planned. Like dominoes tipping, like fire jumping, like justice walking. 16 pairs of eyes, 16 growing shadows, 16 men losing sight faster than they could pray. Caldwell backed away, stumbling, terrified, realizing too late what he was dealing with. This was no curse, this was vengeance. Cold, calculated, perfect. And Elias wasn't finished yet. If you want next, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so the story doesn't stop here. 16 overseers were going blind. The yard was chaos, and now the master finally understood. Elias wasn't just fighting back. He was dismantling the entire system. Screams tore open the night. real screams, deep screams, the kind that made even the bravest men choke. One overseer staggered into a post, another tripped over his own boots, a third dropped to his knees, hands shaking, eyes pouring tears like boiling water. The poison was doing its work. Not fast, not slow, perfect. The air filled with panic, the smell of fear, the sound of men losing everything they relied on. "My eyes! I can't see! Help me, somebody!" Caldwell backed away like he'd seen the devil. Boots sliding in the dirt, hands trembling, face drained white. This was a man who'd controlled hundreds, a man who'd ordered whippings, sales, punishments. Now he had no power left, not even over himself. He pointed at Elias, voice cracking like breaking wood. "What are you?" Elias didn't move, didn't smile, didn't soften. "I'm the man you should have feared." Caldwell swallowed hard, eyes darting, calculating, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. Not when a fourth overseer screamed. Not when a fifth collapsed. Not when the blind men started bumping into each other like drunk ghosts in the darkness. The slaves watched from the doorway, silent, shocked, awe spreading across their faces in a way they'd never felt on this land before. For the first time, they weren't the ones terrified. Caldwell grabbed Elias by the shirt, a desperate move, a final swing at control. "What did you use? What did you put in my men's eyes?" Elias stared at him calmly, as if explaining something simple, something obvious. "Your own poisoned." Caldwell froze. Confusion flickered, then horror, a horror that came from realization. This wasn't magic. This wasn't a curse. This was their own cruelty turned back on them. "You spit it. You touched it. You carry it." Caldwell stumbled back, tripping over a barrel as screams continued behind him. No, this isn't possible." But then Caldwell blinked hard, then again, then slower. A sting, a burn, a shadow creeping in from the edges of his sight. Elias saw it, recognized it instantly. The master was next. Caldwell's voice broke, a whisper barely hanging on to hope. "Elias, help me!" Elias stepped closer, face cold, voice like thunder on the horizon. "You didn't help us." The master trembled, vision already fading, and Elias turned his back on him, the first slave in that yard ever brave enough to do it. The night swallowed Caldwell's last strength, and the plantation finally began to fall. 19 men, 19 overseers, all blind, all powerless, and one man, Elias, finally free. The yard was silent, except for ragged breathing and distant groans, broken curses spilling into the night. Elias stepped forward, sunlight barely touching the Georgia horizon, the first rays catching on sweat, dust, and blood. He walked slowly, confidently, every step measured, every heartbeat steady. The slaves came out quietly, eyes wide, hearts racing, some crying, some trembling, but all watching him like a legend had risen before their eyes. Master Caldwell lay on the ground, hands covering his empty vision. The other overseers floundered blindly, tripping over barrels, slamming into posts, knocking rifles from trembling hands. The power balance had shifted. Permanently. Elias looked at them, not with rage, not with joy, not with hatred, just control. He had waited, he had watched, he had learned, and now justice, cold, precise, perfect, was served. The slaves slowly stepped forward, whispers of awe and disbelief rippling through them. No chains held them tonight. No fear ruled them tonight. Elias raised his head toward the rising sun, the heat warming his back, freedom already tasting sweet in the morning air. He didn't speak, he didn't boast, he simply walked through the yard, past the blind overseers, past the fallen master, and into the fields. The cotton swayed around him like waves, every stalk a witness, every leaf a testament to the impossible he had achieved. No whip could reach him, no orders could bind him, no cruelty could touch him again, because the impossible had been done. 19 overseers blinded, one man standing, and the plantation would never be the same. The slaves watched him disappear into the horizon, silent, hopeful, knowing the story of Elias would spread, a legend no whip, no chain, no master could ever erase. And somewhere in the distant trees the world seemed to exhale. The night surrendered. The dawn welcomed him. Elias had turned fear into power, pain into strategy, oppression into victory. And the plantation learned a truth they would never forget. One mind, one plan, one man was enough. If you were blown away by Elias's impossible trick, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And tell everyone about this dark, unbelievable story.